Hey kids, howdy and welcome. It is time this week for Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. We are sitting on April 13th. It's tax week in the United States, which I've certainly been thinking a lot about. But I have such sort of good astrological news this week with the new moon
That's great.
in Aries. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If I were a pop astrologer, I'd be like, we get to set anew. We begin again. Everything will be left from behind. Well, last year we get to create everything as we want it.
Yes, astrological new year, right?
Right. But it ain't that, because we're not in that quite of an atmosphere. But it is a market shift in the lunar cycle experience, which we all move through in our bodies very directly, and this new moon changes the dynamic of something that started in October. Finding Your Voice started on Saturday, and I always keep the registration open until Tuesday after the first class, because if you want to join, it's very, very easy to get, watch the first class and get caught up with the homework before class 2. Tuesday night, the registration be closed, and we'll see you next year with that class. And I have a dream question this week. I got a fascinating email from someone named Monique. So Monique writes, I've been listening to your podcast for a while and really trust your perspective. So I wanted to ask about something that's been confusing and honestly kind of upsetting to watch. A close friend of mine has a 7-year-old who's having a lot of nightmares, but also what seems to be night terrors. And it feels like two different things happening at once. Some nights the child wakes up scared and can talk about the dream, and other nights it's like they're not even fully awake, just screaming and inconsolable. My friend is exhausted, I bet, and doesn't really know what to do, and I feel so helpless because I don't know how to guide her. Is this something that has meaning from a dream perspective, or is it more just neurological? And is there anything supportive she can actually do in the moment or over time? Thank you for anything you can share, Monique. Yeah, this is brutal because night terrors, the where she's talking about the inconsolable flailing and screaming, that can reach the level of sleep disorder, where it becomes this chronic, very difficult, lifelong problem that interferes with sleep. But
where's the line?
Well, the but is children have this as a common experience. All children do, having this at least once in their life, where adults would not necessarily report it with that same kind of, way that all kids experience it at one point. But kids are in plastic brains. Their brains are growing and growing and growing until they're about 8 or 9 years old. And so while I don't know the neurological connection to why that brain sort of structure allows for more night terrors, but it is very, very common for this to pass. Now, I don't have any information here, and I am not a physician or a neurologist or an expert in sleep. My expertise is in dreams and their interpretation. But I have a couple of things to say. First of all, they are different states. When the child wakes up and is frightened but can describe the dream, that's a nightmare. When that's not possible, when the child seems to be just reacting and, emotionally, that's a night terror. So the simple distinction is a nightmare is just a regular dream. It happens in REM sleep. The REM ends, you wake up. Sometimes the nightmare is strong enough, you burst into wakefulness, and a child will be frightened, and that's when they come into the room or scream, and you go and meet them.
Right.
Night terror is brain-related neurologically. There's a way in which all of the chemistry works such that just when you need to be paralyzed in your bed so you don't act out what the neofrontal cortex is doing when it's all lit up during sleep and dreaming, it naturally lifts just before consciousness returns. We call that waking up. We would never even know that during the dream state we couldn't move. But consciousness can return before the body's letting the paralysis go. That's the disordered brain doing things out of order, and I don't know why that happens. But the state that the child is in is half conscious and half not, a little awake, a little asleep, both. Because they're still paralyzed, they cannot move and they feel like they cannot breathe. So the result is a terrified child because they feel like the boogeyman is sitting on their chest and choking them out.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of consoling there other than regulating, touching, holding, waiting to, have your child come to more alertness and then responding to the dysregulated body and give, your child as much comfort that, in the waking realm, mommy or daddy or both are, there to help. The most important thing that I have said to parents many, many times, I even have a book proposal for this, a book on children's dreams for
I was just thinking
for
that when
parents.
you
It's
started
called
talking about
Not
it. Yeah.
Just a Dream. And I have a whole book proposal and outline for this book and some initial research because I thought it was just a fascinating area. And then something else grabbed me and I was off publishing my first dream dictionary. When I'm accustomed to hearing parents say, and much of this comes from the media more than my life experience. I am not in the bedrooms across America. What parents do in relation to dreaming, but in television and movies, what do they always say? It's just a dream. Never, ever, ever say it's just a dream.
Okay.
You want to dispel your child's anxiety and you tell them to ignore it because it's meaningless and their brain and their body is dysregulated. You're setting them up to have a big confusion around what is so about their regulated state. And it dispels intimacy. Right? The child is having an internal experience that's powerful, and the parent opts out. So all I want parents to do is to ask, you had a dream, not it's just a dream. Oh, baby, you had a dream. You had a bad dream. You had a bad dream that was really scary, wasn't it? What happened in your dream? Tell me about it. Now the parent has joined the child in a profound state for the child, and intimacy grows from that. That child is going to come to that parent as a teenager much more readily to share internal angst because there's a setup for that in childhood, and you miss an incredible opportunity when you dismiss something that rich that's happening inside your child. So if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that I go chronologically, right? My outline is chronological. I set it up that way. And the intention is to help you navigate the week's energy. And so, I present it in, chronological order. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to talk about the bookends, the sandwich, bread, which is simple and not much. And then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about the meat. Tomorrow, Mercury leaving Pisces and moving into Aries is chef's kiss. First of all, Mercury is not comfortable in Pisces. And so while I've been talking for months about the opportunity that we've had, that there's been such a deep Piscean stellium, that all the personal planets were still together when they entered the sign of Pisces. And so the process that we've been able to do with our perception and our voices and our communication has gone deeper because of the placement in Pisces. But in terms of top of the line communication and getting through your day using your mind and voice, it's been a shit show. It felt to me like Mercury was just retrograde forever. even though it was only the typical 3 weeks, right? And I wrote
Yeah.
in my subscription series when I talked about this switch, I said, Mercury's been in Pisces for the last 16 years because it just felt. So Mercury in Aries gets out of the deep end of the pool where he's not comfortable or effective, and we get to be on fire a little bit again with the mind, which will pay great dividends in this next lunar cycle that's very Aries heavy. We got a lot of New Year startup energy, and then the addition of Mercury tomorrow sets us up for the new moon to have our minds already on fire, ready to be in action, along with the body and our inspiration and our sense of responsibility from the other folk who are in Aries. This is also the free and clear portion of Mercury's cycle. So he will move through Aries, then Taurus, and then Gemini without doing any slowing down or backward moving. Now, when we get into June and Mercury enters Cancer, that's the next retrograde sign. All the Mercury retrogrades this year are in water signs. That's also beneficial for us because one of the things we're always having to do is like get our mind and our heart into congruency, right? Where we're saying things that we feel are so, that we feel a certain way, and we're able to put that into language. That's a mind and heart in congruency. Now that the planetary parade has like busted up and we're out of the crazy series of lunations with the 28 degree phenomenon, Mercury moving into Aries, getting closer to Mars, to me, that it's now more about our walk and our talk getting into some alignment because we've opened the emotional body to a lot of shadow work of late. And so I like Mercury moving into Aries for a kind of like put a button on it. Like we're in some fire, let's get out of the water. We'll have plenty to dive back into later in the year. Let's dry off in the warmth of the Aries fire like a nice warm breeze on the beach. Now on Sunday, we move into the Taurus mansion. So next week's podcast, we'll talk a little bit more about that energy because really when we meet next week at this time, we will just have entered the sign of Taurus and we'll leave Aries behind, which is, again, 2 days after the new moon, just like that's been the case through all of these crazy lunations. They start out in one sign, and then 2 days later, the sun moves into a new sign. And so that's what's happening this week. And so when we get into the Taurus sensibility, Venus rules the next 4 weeks. Things calm down a tiny bit. Because in this moment, I'm thinking that May might be a little calmer, but I could be making that up. So don't take my word for it right now. Just know that I think we will all welcome the more grounded pace. I like to say Taurus understands how to move at the speed of your heartbeat. And that's the energy that's going to be integrating everything starting Sunday, Monday. Okay, the big news of the week is big news astrologically, more than just the new moon in Aries that signifies the lunations kick off of the new year, right? The astrological year begins with the sun moving into Aries and the equinox that generates. But until the Aries moon joins the Aries sun, we don't have the power of the solar system's reflection of planting new seeds of intention and kicking off another lunar cycle. Now, the joke that I made earlier about the pop astrologers is that this is such a ginormous sort of mountain of Aries energy because Neptune, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Chiron, Sun, and Moon are all in Aries during this new moon. That doesn't leave much
Wow.
else.
Wow.
And Venus, though she's sort of the outlier, not really making any direct connection to anyone in the new moon. She's in Taurus in her ruling sign. She's a couple of degrees away from Uranus, so she's getting kind of excited about love that's, drumming in the heartbeat, but still, excitable. So my message about that would be, you don't have to be concerned during this passage from the last lunar cycle into this next one with the emotional shadow work that last lunar cycle was all about, right? That was a Pisces-driven new moon, which means we started that lunar cycle buried in the deep of the unconscious, which is, the precursor to shadow work, because the things that we're not looking at and are afraid to look at, they're hanging out down there in the dark voids of Pisces until we look at them. So we did a lot of that last lunar cycle, and this one is so much about Mars and action and starting up new things. I can hear a pop astrologer overselling that as if somehow the pain of the past is gone, and we can start afresh and new.
Because it's a new...
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a grand sextile being formed by Pluto bringing the deep transformation, Uranus still in Taurus, Venus' sign, bringing enlightenment and awakening, tempered by Venus, so not too electrifying, which will change later this month when Uranus moves back into Gemini. But for now, that trine that's part of this new moon says we can grab slow change and fast change both with ease. And the fast change is slow enough still that our hearts can receive it. And then the stellium in Aries that's making it the grand sextile, of course, has to include Neptune, because that's, the middle planet in the sextile, last year and this year. But that's where the fact that Mercury right there at 3 degrees and Mars, the ruler of this new moon, at 5 degrees of Aries, Saturn, the teacher who's been hanging out with Neptune, starting to leave the connection to Neptune behind, but is still close enough at 7.5 degrees to be part of an outrageous middle aspect of the grand sextile where fire, movement, responsibility, and inspiration are. So those words I just used is the words of Saturn and Neptune, responsibility and inspiration. But the fact that Mercury and Mars walk and talk finally out of the depths of change and transformation and into movement and action, but still connected to what Neptune is inspiring and what Saturn is demanding. We can't just fire it up through our voice and our bodies. Saturn says, haven't you learned anything about tempering that fire? So hopefully we have. So that over at 26, 27 degrees of Aries, where Chiron and the sun and the moon are, we can take an individual sense of me in a body, me with some action, me making choices from a healed consciousness as opposed to coming from wound. That's the idea that not connected to the 2 to 5 degree Aries stellium, but off to the side is us in conscious awareness, sun, unconscious impulses, moon, Chiron, the master with us, not Chiron, the, oh, honey, did you call your therapist? It's like when I really want to be snarky at the dog park, I'll say to somebody, I think you should call a friend.
What?
I've
so
actually
good.
only did that once. I only did that once. It just Schadenfreude. It felt good. Not going to lie.
That's such a good line. Oh, honey, call a friend.
So, this is my sort of short pitch on Chiron. We think of him as the wounded healer, but he's really here to teach us how to master the mystery of being in a body on Earth. So
Yes.
he has to heal all the gunky wounds before we are able to channel and master that energy coming through us. So this new moon meets every single one of us exactly at the level of our wounds turning to mastery consciousness with this new moon, right? The pop astrologers would say everybody's moving free of wound. But that ain't true. If you're at the beginning of that journey and the wounds are ripe and deep, this new moon will meet you where you're at and sort of affirm that as you march through your life, you can attend to the wounds that keep you from being on fire more powerfully. And if you aren't walking around in wounded consciousness and you're more in the healing presence availability, that's not really language, but having the mastery of living available to Chiron, this new moon will meet you at that level and everything in between. Now I want to pull the early Aries stellium and Pluto out from the fray to examine it. So you've got Pluto, change and transformation at 5 degrees of Aquarius. You have Neptune at 2, Mercury at 3, Mars at 5, and Saturn at 7.5 of Aries. That's a perfect sextile from Pluto and essentially the midpoint of that stellium, emphasizing Mars and Mercury walk and talk. So there's been like a segregation between the crazy external world that's on fire this year and the personal experience of change and transformation that we're going through to like meet it. To me, they've been very separate experiences, meaning the things we've been going through since that first new moon at 28 Libra in October has been righteously difficult and not necessarily because of the outside challenges. They've been difficult internally as well as the outside expression, the expression of revolution. This stellium has both the kind of institutional consciousness of Neptune and the global consciousness of Saturn, making it a grand sextile of change on the planet. But by plopping Mercury and Mars down there, it's all about your walk and talk, kids. Now, Chiron's presence with the sun and the moon speaks even more to what are you carrying in that body of yours? Are you still carrying a basket full of wounded resentments and unforgivenesses? You're not going to be able to move as fast as the world is going to require you to. That stellium in Aries, that's our responsibility, our walk, our talk, and our inspirations, is also holding an in conjunct with the South Node. South Node holds our past, including all of the patterns of the past that maybe interfered with you walking the talk that flies out of your mouth. And so this eliminator angle with the past allows this new moon to also do that for us, that we can leave some of our, old resistances in the past so that we can be walking through the world the way we're saying we are. Like, I get a lot of motivation in my spiritual practice from this piece. It's not a big piece of the motivation, but I certainly want to be living a devotional life like I tell people I am. So I stay disciplined. Pluto is also in conjuncting the South Node because of the geometry that says we're leaving the past behind because we're changing so deeply. You put the two in conjuncts together, and it's the shape of a yod, a finger of God. And so the message there is if you are willing to drop into change at a death rebirth level, then you can work with your walk and your talk and transform completely how you move through life by integrating everything the last, say, 6 months have brought to us in the world of like deconstructing our consciousness, this is like the first new moon of, I wouldn't say reconstructing, of like snapping us back into shape and saying, get moving, the race has begun. So the last thing I want to talk about with this new moon is how we started when I began with the idea that there's a newness to this new moon that really closes off the chapter that began in October with that new moon in Libra at 28 degrees. I know I've talked about this on the podcast before, but, repetition is one of the ways we learn. The Saros cycle has that every new moon degree point descends in numerical order. So if you have a new moon at 28 degrees in October, it should have been at 27 degrees in November. Then 26, because that's how this 19-year cycle works. But it's not perfect in, the Earth's orbit isn't the same speed at every minute in the calendar year. And so while the moon is moving through these months of spring, and we're a little bit faster, that's why they can be sort of close together as opposed to, cleanly 1 degree apart. But the idea that they were so close together that they were all crammed at 28, 28, 28, 28, 28, that's unusual. Then this one is at 27, and then next month I think it's like 24 or 25. Like it snaps back into ordinary space. But if you combine the not so ordinary tight precision of the same degree point, because remember, if you got 6 lunations in a row at the same degree point, however it was touching your chart will be touched again from a slightly different angle, and then again from a slightly different angle the next month, and then again from a slightly different angle. I talked about my Sun and Venus at 28 and 29 Leo got hit directly with every single one of those new moons, but from a different place in my consciousness. What makes it a truly sort of magnificent astrological anomaly is both its insertion into a radically unusual outer planet setup, but also this traveling parade. That could only happen the way it did, with all of the personal planets staying in the same sign together for like 6 cycles in a row, because Mercury, the fastest, slowed down because of his retrograde, so he stayed in Pisces for 17 years. You had the faster planet of Mars and Venus. I think Mars entered first, and then Venus. Eventually, Venus overtook Mars. But that overtaking took 5 months, right? So there was yet this third anomaly of the perfect storm of entrance into the gather of each of the personal planets. It's like elegantly set up just for us. So make no mistake about it. There was a process. It started in late October. It ends with the end of this lunar cycle that started with the new moon in Pisces. By the way, also at 28 degrees. So we then include the Pisces lunation in the 28-degree process, and we could call that the rehab after the surgery of eclipse. So we're out of rehab, and we're done. The bandages are off. The swelling on our faces has diminished from the surgery that we, the age and gender-affirming care we just had. So there really is cause to say, we're done. We're all starting again. It's magnificent. It's bigger than any other astrological new moon in Aries that you've ever experienced. And I think that would be accurate on some level. But still, astrology isn't magic. It simply reflects what's happening with each of us and all of us together. And so you're going to find your version and your journey of shadow work in the heart, completing itself as good as it can be for the moment, and then learning how to get our mind and our body on the same path and start moving now. Have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. Today we have Elle calling in from Utah. Hey Elle, what you dreaming?
Well, I want to preface that I've had recurring dreams throughout my life. And then this particular dream first happened several years ago, and it's come up again recently. The dream began, my consciousness first experienced black blank darkness.
Okay.
And then I observed what appeared to be a Baroque style painting. There was blue sky and large puffy white clouds.
Okay.
And I observed a small town.
In the painting, or?
Yeah, like there was blackness all around me.
Baroque is like very colorful and intense, very realistic. It's
Yes.
the first, that's what's it. Like, even before we get to the rest of the dream, you mentioning that style is just interesting because it was a style of hyper realism and real depth of shadow, and that made paintings look very, like, real.
Yes, yeah. And even as I was dreaming, that thought came into my mind. Oh, Baroque.
Oh, now that's even more interesting. I stop interrupting you. Keep going.
You're perfect. So again, there was blue sky in the background, large puffy white clouds, and then I observed a small town. The painting was unframed.
Oh.
The homes and shops were brick and brown and set in the background, and they were not more than a couple of stories high. Then there was a street area and a large grass park-like space. It seemed that everyone from the town was outside in the streets and in the open grass area. As I leaned in and looked more closely, I realized that everyone was fighting each other, and the scene was gruesome. Men, women, young children,
wait, I'm sitting
and the
up
elderly.
now. Keep going.
Yeah, so every age, women, men, young children, and the elderly, they were all
Everybody.
fighting each other. Everybody. Yeah.
Everybody.
And I watched as the scene began to move and seemingly come to life. So I realized I was then standing on a grassy knoll in the park, overlooking the scene as the fighting became more violent and gradually came closer to where I was standing. I was afraid someone would notice me and would want to attack me. I was scared. I wanted to scream, and I wanted the violence to stop. I felt the grass beneath my feet shift and the ground give way under my weight, and I felt the dirt under my feet. I looked down and noticed my feet had changed, then glanced up the right side of my body to see that I had turned into a large dragon.
Okay. Keep
Yeah.
going.
My scales were thick and dark brown with green and purple sheen. I looked back up at the crowd and felt fire swell in my chest and up to my throat, burning in my mouth. I wanted to unleash fire into the fighting crowd, but I didn't. I pushed my feet into the ground to feel the damp dirt more firmly. Some in the crowd did notice me, but they all continued fighting and killing each other. I didn't want to be there anymore. Remembering again that I had become a dragon, That meant that I had wings, and I instinctively knew that I could fly. I pushed off of the ground and flew up into the sky and into the clouds. And that was my
Oh,
dream.
my goodness. Okay, I love the twisty turny that we went to two surprising places, and actually even just the way the dream begins in this blackness, to me that elevates it a little bit because it's kind of like presenting to you first we're in the void. So if
Yeah.
we're in the void, then we're in some consideration of consciousness itself, as opposed to like L dreaming or, my individual experience. Just starting there, because the first theme is always going to tell me, like, well, where are we? What territory? What area of this dreamer's consciousness that we're in? But you're in a collective consciousness where first everything is formless in a void. So then what emanates out of the void, the first like layer of consciousness or conscious awareness, is vibrant, right? It has earth, it's got a sky, there are clouds, and there's people, and there's sort of a loveliness. I loved all of the details of the town. But it's a Baroque painting, very realistic, but not quite consciousness itself. It's still seeing the world through a lens of, and then you can fill in the blank, a lens of not being heart-centered, a lens of, not knowing your higher consciousness. Then you get to the place where I just wanted to start singing from a distance. God doesn't see that we are all killing each other in war.
Yeah.
I always hated that song a little bit, and I would never sing it, though I sang in many a spiritual center, and that would have been a perfect song to sing. But I will not sing a lyric that I do not believe in. And God watching us from a fucking distance is not where we need the power of the creator and the universe to be. We need it to be inside of each of us here. Because
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
a distance, it's blue and pretty.
Yeah.
Like
Until I
Artemis
looked more
is in
closely,
space while
yeah.
we're talking right now. We're in an elevated collective reminder of our planetary consciousness in the living dream of four astronauts in space. So back to out of my association, I think it's the same thing in your dream. You're looking at the idyllic notion of what life is supposed to be, but looking closer, you see that we are in conflict. We are at war. Everybody. That's what I loved about that. It wasn't about parsing through, well, this is good and this is okay. It's a more archetypal, heavy-handed dream. Everybody's at war. Then this fabulous thing that happens to you, which is now back to your personal experience of, well, this is L's dream. So in your personal experience of it, it's about your transformation into the most charismatic, powerful, charismatic, I say, for the Eastern dragon, powerful and fierce like the Western dragon. And green and purple is, heart-centered and crown-centered. And not for nothing, I just made a bracelet with amethyst and jade beads. It's sitting down on I wore it yesterday for the first time. So those are very yummy, sacred colors of being how we want to be in this world. Centered in the heart, green. Connected to the wisdom above, violet, and let the fire fill our chest and our voice. And when it's too much for us, we remember that we have wings. We do not have to stay in the muck longer than is needed or necessary at any given moment. And we have the capacity to rise up with our wings to rest before returning to, shout the new voice with fire out of your very full chest and mouth that is burning to speak words of, peace and activism and whatever's yours.
That's beautiful.
What is yours? Like, how are you relating to this moment and your own personal, like, voice?
I actually grew up in a tumultuous house that was violent, and I didn't have much of a voice. But I was born on a new moon, and my first house, my sun is in Virgo, and my second house, it has the moon and Mercury in Virgo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I think I am realizing, and on my spiritual journey, that I have wings, I have ability beyond what I knew was capable.
Yes. And the first house into the second house, as the sort of holder of that, says, I hold how this Merkaba that I'm in works. I know it in who I am. I know it in what I value. That's the beauty of Virgo's connection to the body. Aries and Mars invented that we have one, but Virgo is the mastery of how to be in two bodies at the same time, one that's in 3 dimensions and one that's in 5. And the 5-dimensional us is just as much us as the 3-dimensional, but it's like folded in on us because that's how other dimensions show up here. They can't be here, so they get folded up into our physical body. And if we don't spread up and learn how to inhabit the Merkaba 5-dimensional body, which is the dragon, then you're only in one end of the embodiment, and then you can't be living masterfully or in what I like to call conscious embodiment.
Yeah, I love that. And when I felt the fire burning, I felt burning. It felt very real in my chest, swelling up through my throat and into my mouth. I felt the hot fire in my mouth.
Fabulous. So 2 more things to say to you. One is, I love the fact that the dragon, before you, the dragon, could sort of protect yourself, you had to ground. You had to push your feet into the ground. That's the 3-dimensional body's connection to the Great Mother, the Earth, that birthed the 3-dimensional body. So you can't forget it. You have to ground down into that and then trust that the Merkaba will take you where you need to be from a higher consciousness. And then the other thing I just want to say is about when you grew up in a house like yours, the loudest person wins.
Yeah.
So that lives in you too. If we transform that out of wound and shadow, it's that I know how to be the loudest person and win as a conscious, aware, mature, embodied adult who's living in a crazy world and needs to figure out who you want to be. So have at it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for calling in, Elle. I love this dream.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.